Captain Sarah Mitchell gripped the controls of her A-10 Thunderbolt II as she flew over the hostile desert terrain of Afghanistan. The sun blazed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the rocky landscape below. She had been patrolling this sector for 3 hours, her eyes constantly scanning for any signs of trouble. The radio crackled with routine communications from base. But something felt different today. Sarah was one of only a handful of female A-10 pilots in the Air Force, and she had fought hard to earn her place in the cockpit of the fearsome aircraft, nicknamed the Warthog. The A-10 was built for one purpose: close air support for ground troops. Its massive 30mm cannon could tear through enemy armor like paper, and its ability to fly low and slow made it perfect for precision strikes in support of soldiers on the ground. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains 60 miles away, a special operations team was preparing for what would become one of the most dangerous missions of the war. The team consisted of 381 Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Delta Force operatives, led by Commander Jake Thompson. Their mission was to capture a high-value target hiding in a fortified compound, nestled in a valley surrounded by steep cliffs. Intelligence reports suggested the compound housed a terrorist leader responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The mission had been planned for weeks, with every detail carefully considered. The team would insert via helicopter under cover of darkness, secure the target, and extract before dawn. It was supposed to be a quick in-and-out operation. As the sun began to set, Commander Thompson gathered his men for a final briefing. The helicopters were already spinning up on the tarmac, their rotors creating a thunderous roar that could be felt in their chests. Each operator checked his gear one last time, ensuring weapons were loaded, communication equipment was functioning, and medical supplies were secure. Sarah completed her patrol and was heading back to base when she received an unusual communication from the operations center. There was chatter about a large-scale special operations mission launching that evening, but pilots weren't typically briefed on ground operations unless air support was specifically requested. She filed the information away and focused on her landing approach. The special operations team loaded into their helicopters as darkness fell. The pilots used night vision to navigate through the treacherous mountain passes, flying low to avoid enemy radar. The men sat in tense silence, each lost in his own thoughts about the mission ahead. Some were veterans of dozens of similar operations, while others were experiencing their first major combat mission. Commander Thompson reviewed the mission timeline one more time. They would fast rope into the compound, clear the buildings systematically, secure the target, and call for extraction. The entire operation was expected to take no more than 2 hours. What none of them knew was that their intelligence was fatally flawed. As the helicopters approached the target area, the pilots reported no unusual activity. The compound appeared quiet, with only a few lights visible in the buildings. The team prepared to fast rope down, checking their weapons one final time. Commander Thompson gave the signal, and the first group of operators began their descent into what they believed would be a routine mission. The moment their boots hit the ground, everything went wrong. The compound erupted in gunfire from multiple directions. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as dozens of enemy fighters opened fire from concealed positions. The intelligence had been a trap, and the special operations team found themselves in the middle of a carefully planned ambush, with nowhere to run. The sound of automatic weapons fire shattered the night silence, as Commander Thompson's team found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. Enemy fighters had been waiting for them, hidden in spider holes, behind rocks, and in buildings throughout the compound. What was supposed to be a quick capture mission had instantly become a fight for survival. Contact! Contact! We're taking heavy fire from all directions! Commander Thompson shouted into his radio as bullets whizzed past his head. His team scattered for cover behind whatever they could find: concrete barriers, abandoned vehicles, and small buildings. The enemy had chosen their ambush site perfectly, leaving the special operations team trapped in a valley with steep cliffs on 3 sides. The helicopter pilots tried to provide covering fire, but the intense enemy fire forced them to pull back to a safe distance. "We can't get close enough for extraction," the lead pilot reported over the radio. "The LZ is too hot." The team watched helplessly as their extraction helicopters disappeared into the night, leaving them stranded in enemy territory. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez dove behind a low wall as rocket-propelled grenades exploded around his position. Concrete fragments rained down on him as he tried to establish communication with his squad. "Alpha Team, report in," he yelled over the chaos. Only 3 of his 6-man team responded. The others were either dead or too pinned down to answer. As the night wore on, the situation grew increasingly desperate. The enemy forces seemed to have unlimited ammunition and reinforcements. Every time the Special Operations team tried to advance or find a better position, they were met with overwhelming firepower. Several operators had been wounded, and medical supplies were running low. Lieutenant Sarah Williams, the team's medic, crawled from position to position under heavy fire, treating wounded operators. A bullet had grazed her helmet, leaving a deep groove in the Kevlar. But she continued her work without hesitation. "I need more morphine," she called out to Commander Thompson. They were running out of everything: ammunition, medical supplies, and most importantly, time. The enemy fighters were well organized and disciplined. They used coordinated attacks to probe the team's defenses, testing for weak points. Every attempt by the Special Operations Forces to break out of the valley was met with fierce resistance. The enemy had positioned machine gun nests on the high ground, giving them a clear field of fire over the entire area. Commander Thompson realized they were facing a much larger force than intelligence had indicated. Instead of a small group guarding a single high-value target, they were up against what appeared to be an entire company of well-trained fighters. The mission had been compromised from the beginning, and now his team was paying the price for faulty intelligence. As dawn approached, the situation became even more critical. With daylight, the enemy would have clear visibility of the team's positions, making their already precarious situation virtually hopeless. The operators had been fighting for hours without resupply, and ammunition was running dangerously low. "Base, this is Serpent 6. Commander Thompson called into his radio, using his call sign. "We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support and emergency extraction." The response from base was not encouraging. All available aircraft were committed to other operations, and it would be hours before any support could arrive. The team members looked at each other with grim determination. They were professional soldiers who had trained for situations like this, but the reality was stark. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped with no immediate hope of rescue. Some of the younger operators showed signs of panic, but the veterans kept them focused on the immediate tasks of survival and fighting. Enemy fire continued to rain down on their positions as the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon. The Special Operations team had survived the night, but they all knew that daylight would bring new challenges and likely renewed enemy attacks. They needed a miracle, and they needed it soon. Captain Sarah Mitchell was just finishing her pre-flight inspection when the emergency call came through the base communication system. The operations center was buzzing with activity as reports of the trapped Special Operations team reached higher command. Sarah paused near her A-10, listening to the urgent radio chatter that filled the air. "All available aircraft. We have a Broken Arrow situation." The voice crackled over the radio. Broken Arrow was the military code for a unit in immediate danger of being overrun. Sarah's blood ran cold as she heard the coordinates. The trapped team was in a valley she knew well, a perfect kill zone surrounded by high ground where enemy forces could rain down fire with impunity. Major Collins, the squadron commander, gathered all available pilots in the briefing room. His face was grim as he explained the situation. "We have 381 Special Operations personnel trapped in grid 4,127. They've been under continuous fire for 6 hours. Every extraction attempt has failed due to intense enemy fire. They need close air support, and they need it now." Sarah raised her hand. "Sir, what's the weather situation in that area?" She knew that mountain valleys could be treacherous for aircraft, especially the low-flying A-10. Major Collins consulted his notes. "Visibility is poor due to dust and smoke. Ceiling is less than 500 feet. All other aircraft have been grounded due to conditions." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The weather conditions were below minimum safety requirements for most aircraft operations. Flying in such conditions violated standard operating procedures and put any pilot at extreme risk. The A-10 was capable of flying in poor weather, but it would require exceptional skill and courage to navigate the mountain valley in near-zero visibility. "I'll take it," Sarah said quietly. Every head in the room turned toward her. Major Collins shook his head. "Mitchell, those conditions are outside acceptable parameters. We can't authorize a mission under those circumstances." Sarah stood up, her jaw set with determination. "Sir, those men are going to die if someone doesn't help them. My aircraft is the only one capable of providing the close support they need." The debate that followed was intense but brief. Protocol demanded that no aircraft fly in such dangerous conditions. Military regulations existed for good reasons. They kept pilots alive and preserved expensive aircraft. But the lives of 381 Special Operations personnel hung in the balance, and every minute of delay meant more casualties. Commander Johnson from Special Operations joined the discussion via radio. His voice was strained with exhaustion and desperation. "We've lost 17 men already, and we have multiple wounded who won't survive another hour without medical evacuation. We need close air support to break the enemy's hold on the high ground, or this entire operation will be a massacre." Sarah listened to the ongoing debate between her commanders and the Special Operations leadership. She knew the rules, understood the risks, and recognized that what she was proposing violated every safety protocol in the book. But she also knew that her A-10 was specifically designed for this type of mission, low-level attack, in support of ground troops under the worst possible conditions. "Sir, request permission to launch immediately." Sarah interrupted the discussion. "I can navigate that valley in these conditions." The A-10 was built for this exact scenario. Major Collins looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Mitchell, if you go down in there, we can't come get you. You'll be on your own." Sarah was already moving toward her aircraft. "Those men don't have anyone else. I'm going." She knew she was effectively ending her military career by defying direct orders. But the lives of 381 fellow service members outweighed any personal consequences. As she climbed into her cockpit, she could hear Major Collins arguing with higher command about authorizing the mission. The A-10's engines roared to life as Sarah began her startup sequence. She had made her decision, and nothing was going to stop her from reaching those trapped operators. The weather conditions were terrible. The enemy presence was overwhelming, and she would be flying alone into a valley filled with anti-aircraft weapons. But none of that mattered. Her radio crackled with a final transmission from Major Collins. "Mitchell, you are not cleared for takeoff. Return to the flight line immediately." Sarah switched off her radio and began taxiing toward the runway. She was going to save those men, regardless of the consequences to her career or her life. Sarah's A-10 thundered down the runway as she pushed the throttles forward, knowing that each second of delay meant more casualties in the valley. The tower was frantically calling her call sign, ordering her to abort takeoff. But she had already committed to the mission. There was no turning back now. The heavily armored aircraft lifted off into the gray morning sky, heading directly toward the mountains where 381 men were fighting for their lives. As she climbed toward the mountain range, Sarah switched to the emergency frequency being used by the trapped Special Operations team. The radio immediately filled with the sounds of intense combat. Automatic weapons fire, explosions, and the desperate voices of men under extreme pressure. Any aircraft. This is Serpent 6. We are in desperate need of close air support. We have multiple wounded and are running low on ammunition. Serpent 6. This is Hog 17, Sarah responded, using her A-10's call sign. I'm inbound to your location with a full load of 30mm rounds and Maverick missiles. Give me your situation and target priorities. The relief in Commander Thompson's voice was immediate and profound. Hog 17. Thank God. We've got enemy positions on the high ground to our north and east. They've got us pinned down with machine guns and mortars. The weather conditions worsened as Sarah approached the target area. Dense clouds hung in the valley like a gray blanket, and visibility dropped to less than a quarter mile. The mountains rose on either side of her aircraft, their peaks hidden in the murky sky. Flying in such conditions required incredible skill and nerves of steel. One wrong turn could send her crashing into a mountainside. Sarah descended into the valley, using her aircraft's advanced targeting systems to navigate through the poor visibility. The A-10's titanium bathtub around the cockpit was designed to protect the pilot from ground fire. But it couldn't protect against flying into a mountain. She had to rely on her instruments and her extensive training to find the trapped team. Serpent 6, I'm having trouble acquiring your position due to weather, Sarah transmitted. Can you mark your location with smoke? Commander Thompson's response was immediate. Negative on the smoke. Hog 17. Enemy is too close to our position. Any marking would also mark us for enemy fire. Sarah would have to find the battle using only her eyes and the sounds of gunfire. The first sign of the fighting was tracer rounds, cutting through the gray morning air. Sarah could see the distinctive green tracers of enemy AK-47 contrasting with the red tracers from American weapons. The Special Operations Team was clustered in a small area at the bottom of the valley, completely surrounded by enemy positions on the high ground. Sarah made her first attack run at dangerously low altitude, flying barely 50 feet above the rocky terrain. Her 30mm cannon roared to life, sending armor-piercing rounds into an enemy machine gun position. The massive gun could fire 3,900 rounds per minute, and the effect on the enemy position was devastating. Rocks and debris flew in all directions as the high explosive rounds tore into the mountainside. Direct hit, Hog 17. Commander Thompson's voice was filled with excitement. That took out their main machine gun. Can you hit the mortar position about 200 meters to the east? Sarah banked her aircraft hard to the right, scanning the mountainside for the mortar team. The poor visibility made target identification extremely difficult, but she could see the flash of mortar rounds being fired. Her second attack run was even more dangerous than the first. Enemy fighters had spotted her aircraft and were now directing small arms fire at her position. Bullets pinged off the A-10's armored hull as she lined up her shot. The 30mm cannon spoke again, walking high explosive rounds directly into the mortar position, but the enemy was adapting to her attacks. As Sarah pulled up from her second run, a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile streaked past her cockpit. The heat-seeking weapon had come within meters of destroying her aircraft. She realized that continuing to make repeated attacks in such poor visibility was essentially suicidal. But the trapped team needed her support. Hog 17, we've got movement on the South Ridge, Commander Thompson reported. Looks like they're bringing up reinforcements and more heavy weapons. Sarah could see vehicles moving along the mountain roads, carrying fresh enemy fighters and equipment to reinforce the ambush. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and time was running out for the Special Operations Team. Sarah's A-10 screamed through the narrow valley at treetop level, dodging surface-to-air missiles and heavy machine gun fire from multiple directions. The enemy had now identified her as the primary threat and was concentrating their anti-aircraft weapons on her position. Every attack run brought her closer to death. But she continued pressing forward, determined to break the enemy's stranglehold on the trapped Special Operations Team. Hog 17, we've got a technical with a mounted heavy machine gun moving up the east slope, Commander Thompson called out urgently. If that thing gets into position, it'll have a clear field of fire on our entire perimeter. Sarah spotted the vehicle, a pickup truck with a .50 caliber machine gun mounted in the bed. It was racing up a winding mountain road, trying to reach a dominant position overlooking the trapped Americans. Sarah rolled her aircraft into a steep diving attack, pushing the A-10 to its limits as she chased the racing vehicle. The truck's driver saw her coming and began swerving wildly, trying to avoid the incoming attack. Sarah's cannon rounds chewed up the rocky road behind the vehicle, walking closer with each burst. Finally, a direct hit sent the truck tumbling down the mountainside in a ball of fire and smoke. But her victory was short-lived. As she pulled up from the attack run, multiple surface-to-air missiles launched from hidden positions throughout the valley. The heat-seeking weapons crisscrossed the sky around her aircraft, forcing Sarah into violent, evasive maneuvers that pushed both her and the A-10 to their absolute limits. She pulled so many G-forces that her vision began to gray out at the edges. Serpent 6, I'm taking heavy fire and running low on ammunition, Sarah transmitted as she banked hard to avoid another missile. What's your status on casualties and ammunition? Commander Thompson's response was sobering. We've lost 23 Kia and have 37 wounded. Ammunition is critical. We've got maybe 20 minutes of sustained fighting left. The math was simple and terrifying. The special operations team couldn't hold their position much longer, and Sarah's aircraft was almost out of ammunition. She had perhaps 2 more effective attack runs before her 30mm cannon ran dry. After that, she would have only her Maverick missiles, which were designed for use against armored vehicles, not infantry positions. Sarah made a decision that would have been considered insane under normal circumstances. Instead of conserving her remaining ammunition for the most critical targets, she would use everything she had left in one massive, sustained attack designed to break the enemy's will to fight. It was a desperate gamble, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She began her final attack run at the lowest altitude yet, flying barely 30 feet above the rocky ground. The A-10's cannon roared continuously as she flew the length of the valley, engaging every enemy position she could identify. Rocks and debris flew everywhere as high-explosive rounds tore into machine gun nests, mortar positions, and fighting holes. Enemy fighters scattered as the massive aircraft roared overhead, its cannon spitting death and destruction. Some tried to stand and fight, firing their assault rifles at the armored aircraft. But the A-10 was designed to absorb such punishment. Bullets bounced off its titanium armor as Sarah continued her devastating attack. When her cannon finally fell silent, Sarah had one weapon left, a single Maverick missile. She spotted a group of enemy fighters attempting to flank the Special Operations Team's position from the west. The missile wasn't designed for use against infantry, but Sarah had an idea. She targeted a large boulder above the enemy position and fired. The Maverick missile struck the massive rock with devastating effect. The explosion brought down a cascade of stones and debris that buried the enemy position and blocked the western approach to the trapped Americans. It was an unconventional use of the weapon, but it achieved the desired effect of eliminating the flanking threat. As the dust and smoke began to clear, something remarkable happened. The volume of enemy fire began to decrease noticeably. Sarah's sustained attack had inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy forces and, more importantly, had broken their morale. The fighters who had been so eager to attack began withdrawing to more defensive positions. Hog 1-7, I think you've got their attention, Commander Thompson reported, with the first note of optimism Sarah had heard in his voice. Enemy fire has decreased significantly. Some of them appear to be withdrawing to the north. Sarah circled overhead, her aircraft now completely out of ammunition but still serving as a psychological weapon against the enemy forces. But Sarah's aircraft was in serious trouble. Multiple hits from small arms fire had damaged several critical systems, and fuel was leaking from punctured tanks. Warning lights flickered across her instrument panel, indicating hydraulic problems and engine damage. She was running out of time to get her crippled aircraft back to base, but she couldn't abandon the Special Operations Team while they were still in danger. With her ammunition exhausted and her aircraft severely damaged, Sarah faced an impossible choice. Her fuel gauges showed critically low levels, and hydraulic fluid was streaming from multiple holes in her aircraft. Every minute she remained over the battlefield increased the likelihood that her A-10 would crash in enemy territory. Yet the Special Operations Team below still needed her presence to keep the enemy forces at bay. Sarah made the decision to remain on station despite the risks to her own life. She continued flying low passes over the enemy positions, using the psychological effect of her aircraft to suppress enemy fire. Even without ammunition, the sight and sound of the fearsome A-10 kept many enemy fighters pinned down in their positions, afraid to expose themselves. Serpent 6. This is Hog 1-7. Sarah transmitted. I'm Winchester on ammunition, but will remain overhead as long as possible. What's your extraction situation? Commander Thompson's response carried new hope. Hog 1-7. Extraction birds are inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Your attacks have broken their main resistance. We think we can hold until the cavalry arrives. The next 15 minutes felt like hours, as Sarah nursed her damaged aircraft through the sky above the battlefield. Her left engine was running rough, throwing off vibrations that shook the entire aircraft. The hydraulic system was failing, making the controls heavy and unresponsive. Warning alarms chimed constantly in her headset, but she ignored them all. Below, the special operations team began to regroup and consolidate their position. The devastating air support had given them the breathing room they desperately needed to treat their wounded and redistribute ammunition. Medics worked frantically to stabilize the most seriously injured operators for evacuation. The sound of approaching helicopters finally echoed through the valley as 4 CH-47 Chinooks appeared through the morning haze. The large twin-rotor aircraft carried additional special operations forces and medical personnel to assist with the evacuation, but they still faced the challenge of landing in a valley under enemy fire. Sarah's presence proved crucial one final time. As the helicopters approached the landing zone, enemy fighters emerged from their hiding places and began firing at the vulnerable aircraft. Sarah immediately dove her crippled A-10 toward the enemy positions, using the aircraft itself as a weapon of intimidation. The enemy fighters scattered back into cover, allowing the helicopters to land safely. Hog 17, this is Dustoff Lead, called the Lead Medical Evacuation Helicopter. We're on the ground and loading casualties. Can you provide cover during our departure? Sarah's aircraft was barely flying at this point, with both engines running roughly and her fuel quantity showing red warning lights. But she managed to circle overhead one more time as the helicopters loaded the wounded and the remaining Special Operations team members. The extraction was completed in record time. All surviving members of the Special Operations team were loaded aboard the helicopters, along with the bodies of their fallen comrades. As the aircraft lifted off and headed toward safety, Sarah finally allowed herself to consider her own desperate situation. Her aircraft was critically low on fuel, flying on 1.5 engines, and losing hydraulic pressure rapidly. The nearest friendly airfield was 40 miles away across mountainous terrain, and she wasn't certain her aircraft could make it. As if to emphasize the point, her right engine began showing signs of failure, with temperatures climbing into the red zone. Mayday, mayday, this is Hog 17, Sarah transmitted on the emergency frequency. Single aircraft, critical fuel state, multiple system failures, requesting priority handling for emergency landing. The response from her home base was immediate. Hog 17. You are cleared direct. All traffic is being diverted. Emergency crews are standing by. The flight back to base was a testament to both Sarah's skill as a pilot and the incredible durability of the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The aircraft limped through the mountains, barely maintaining altitude, as its damaged engines struggled to provide power. Sarah had to constantly adjust her flight path to compensate for the failing hydraulic system and uneven engine thrust. As her home airfield came into view, Sarah could see emergency vehicles lining the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue equipment stood ready to respond if her aircraft crashed during landing. She had enough fuel for exactly one approach. There would be no second chances. The landing was rough but successful. Sarah's A-10 touched down hard and rolled to a stop as emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. When she climbed out of the cockpit, Sarah's legs were shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. She had been flying for over 6 hours, the last 2 under intense combat conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced pilots. The aftermath of the mission revealed the full scope of what Sarah had accomplished. Her unauthorized attack had broken a carefully planned enemy ambush that would have resulted in the complete annihilation of the Special Operations team. Instead, 358 of the 381 operators had survived and been successfully extracted. Her actions had saved hundreds of lives and prevented what would have been one of the worst military disasters in recent history. Though Sarah faced disciplinary action for disobeying direct orders and violating flight safety protocols, the military ultimately recognized the heroic nature of her actions. She was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and became the first female pilot to receive the Air Force Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. Most importantly, 358 families were reunited with their loved ones because one pilot was willing to risk everything to do what was right.